Hey, have you ever met someone who slowly pushed you away? Not in an obvious way, not with a fight, not with a clear reason, but little by little, they just created distance. Like, they stopped opening up, stopped showing up the same way, started acting colder. And at some point, you didn't even recognize them anymore. So you stepped back. You gave them space. You let them go. And only then, they started to feel it. Hi, I'm Aurora, and today we're talking about something a lot of people don't realize they do. The Zodiac signs who push people away and only understand what they lost after it's gone. And this one is uncomfortable. Because it's not about bad intentions. It's not about not caring. It's about fear, about control, about not knowing how to handle what they feel, so they create distance instead. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of this, you know exactly how confusing it can be. Because you keep asking yourself, why are they pulling away? Did I do something wrong? When in reality, it has nothing to do with you. So stay with me, because once you understand this pattern, you stop taking it personally and you start seeing people for who they really are. And before we get into it, I want to know something. What's your sign? Drop it in the comments. I always check, especially the early ones. And quick thing, in the last videos, we talked about the signs who get attached and the ones who pretend they don't care. This is what happens after that. So if you haven't seen those yet, watch this first, and then go check them out, because together, they tell a much bigger story. All right, let's get into this, because the first sign on this list doesn't just push people away, they do it without even realizing until it's too late. All right, let's start with a sign that, honestly, feels everything more intensely than most people realize. Scorpio. Now, Scorpio doesn't push people away in an obvious way. They don't just walk out. They don't always say, "I'm done." It's more subtle than that. It starts with a shift. They begin to hold things in. They stop saying what they feel. They become harder to reach. And if you're close to them, you feel it immediately. That change in energy, that distance that wasn't there before. But here's what's really happening. Scorpio doesn't pull away because they don't care. They pull away because they care too much. Because when something becomes real for them, when emotions start getting deeper, when attachment begins to grow, they feel exposed. And Scorpio doesn't like feeling exposed. They don't like feeling like someone has access to them, to their emotions, to their vulnerabilities. So what do? They protect themselves. And that protection looks like distance. They become more reserved, more controlled, more guarded. They stop reacting the same way. They stop showing as much. And to the other person, it feels like they're being pushed away, like something changed, and no one explained why. And that's where the confusion begins, because from the outside, it looks like Scorpio is losing interest, like they're pulling back for no reason. But inside, it's the opposite. They're thinking more, feeling more, questioning everything, trying to understand if this connection is safe, if it's real, if it's worth the risk. And instead of communicating that, they withdraw. They create space, not because they want to lose you, but because they don't know how to stay without losing control. And here's the part that hits later, when the distance actually works. When the other person starts pulling away too. When the connection weakens, or disappears completely. That's when it hits them. That's when they realize, I didn't lose control. I lost the connection. And by then, it's not always easy to fix, because Scorpio doesn't go back easily, even when they feel it, even when they regret it. So they stay silent, they carry it internally, and they learn, the hard way, that protecting themselves too much can cost them something real. Now, Scorpio pushes people away through intensity and emotional protection. But the next sign? They do it in a completely different way. They don't withdraw emotionally, they disconnect. And sometimes, you don't even realize it's happening until they're already gone. Aquarius. Now this one doesn't push people away with intensity. They do it with something much harder to detect. Distance. But not the obvious kind, not the kind where they disappear completely. No, Aquarius stays. They reply, they show up, sometimes. They keep things just enough. And that's what makes it confusing, because it doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like inconsistency, like something is there, but never fully. And here's what's really happening. Aquarius doesn't like feeling emotionally trapped. They don't like the idea of losing their freedom, their independence, their sense of self. So when a connection starts getting deeper, when emotions begin to grow, they don't move closer. They step back. Not because they don't care, but because they don't want to feel overwhelmed by it. They start needing space, time, distance to think, to understand what they're feeling, without being consumed by it. And while they're doing that, to the other person, it feels like they're slowly disappearing. Like they're losing interest. Like they're not as invested anymore. And eventually, the other person reacts. They pull back too. They stop trying as much. They stop reaching out. And little by little, the connection fades. And Aquarius? At first, they don't even notice. Because in their mind, they just needed space. They assumed things would stay the same. But then, something shifts. The silence becomes real. The absence becomes noticeable. And that's when it hits them. Wait, what happened? Why does this feel empty now? And slowly, they start to realize. It wasn't that the connection disappeared. It's that they created the distance that allowed it to disappear. And the hardest part? By the time they understand it, the other person may have already moved on. Because not everyone waits. Not everyone understands that kind of emotional language. And Aquarius, even though they won't always admit it, they feel that loss deeply. They just process it differently, internally, silently. And that's when they learn that pushing people away slowly can still lead to losing them completely. Now, Scorpio pushes people away through emotional intensity. Aquarius pushes people away through distance. But the next sign? They don't disappear. They don't disconnect. They stay, but they become emotionally unavailable. And that can hurt even more. Capricorn. Now this one is probably the hardest to understand. Because Capricorn doesn't push people away in a way that's obvious. They don't disappear. They don't become inconsistent. They don't create chaos. In fact, they stay. They show up. They respond. They keep things stable. And from the outside, everything looks fine. But something changes, something subtle. They become more reserved. more controlled, more emotionally distant. And if you're paying attention, you feel it. Because even though they're still there, they're not fully there anymore. And that's where it starts. Because Capricorn doesn't handle emotions the way most people expect. They don't process things out loud. They don't react impulsively. They internalize everything. They analyze, they think, they try to understand what they're feeling before they allow it to affect their actions. And when something starts getting too real, too emotional, too uncertain, they don't lean in. They tighten control. They focus on logic, on structure, on maintaining stability. And in doing that, they slowly disconnect from the emotional side of the connection. Not because they don't care, but because they don't want to lose control. Because for Capricorn, losing emotional control feels like losing power, and they won't allow that easily. So instead of expressing what they feel, instead of opening up, instead of taking that emotional risk, they contain it. They hold it in. They act like everything is fine. And to the other person, that feels like distance, like coldness, like something is missing, but no one is saying it out loud. And over time, that emotional gap grows because connection needs presence, not just physical, but emotional. And when that presence isn't there, people start pulling away. They feel unseen, unfelt, disconnected, and eventually, they stop trying. And Capricorn? At first, they might not react. They stay composed, focused, telling themselves, "It's fine, I'm in control." But then, when the distance becomes real, when the silence stays, when the connection is no longer there, that's when it hits. Not loudly, not dramatically, but internally, quietly. They realize, I didn't protect myself. I pushed something real away. And the hardest part? Capricorn doesn't easily go back. Even when they feel it, even when they miss it, they carry it. They process it internally, and they learn that controlling everything can sometimes cost them what mattered the most. Now, Scorpio pushes people away through emotional intensity, Aquarius through distance, Capricorn through control. But the last sign on this list? They don't withdraw, they don't disconnect, they don't control. They hesitate, they overthink, and without realizing, they let the moment pass. Virgo. Now this one doesn't push people away in an obvious way at all. In fact, they often do the opposite. They stay close, they stay present, they stay involved. But something happens internally, something that most people don't see. They start thinking a lot. They analyze every detail, every word, every moment, trying to understand what this connection really means, where it's going, and more importantly, if it's safe. Because for Virgo, connection isn't just about feeling, it's about certainty. And when that certainty isn't there, they hesitate, they slow down, they hold back, they wait for the right moment, the right clarity, the right sign that everything makes sense. But here's the problem. That moment, it doesn't always come. And while they're thinking, while they're analyzing, while they're waiting, the connection is moving. The other person is feeling, expecting, hoping. And eventually, they stop waiting. Because from the outside, Virgo doesn't look unsure. They look uninterested, like they're not fully invested, like they're holding back for a reason. And in a way, They are, but not because they don't care, because they care enough to be afraid of getting it wrong. So instead of moving forward, they stay still. And sometimes, staying still is what causes everything to fall apart. And when that happens, when the moment passes, when the person they were unsure about is no longer there, that's when the realization comes. I should have said something. I should have done something. I should have trusted what I felt. But by then, it's too late. Because Virgo didn't lose the connection, they hesitated long enough for it to disappear. So when you look at all of this together, you start to understand something important. People don't always push others away because they don't care. Sometimes they do it because they don't know how to handle what they feel. Scorpio protects themselves and creates distance through intensity. Aquarius protects their freedom and creates distance through space. Capricorn protects control and creates distance through emotional restraint. Virgo protects certainty and creates distance through hesitation. Different reasons, different behaviors, but the same outcome. Distance, loss, and realization that comes too late. And if you've ever been in this situation, you know how it feels. Not because something ended dramatically, but because it slowly disappeared without ever being fully understood. And maybe this explains something you've been trying to understand for a while. Because sometimes it's not that someone didn't care, it's that they didn't know what to do with how much they felt. So they pulled back. They hesitated. They created distance, thinking they were protecting themselves. But in doing that, they created the very loss they were trying to avoid. And if you've ever been on the other side of that, you know how confusing it feels. Because nothing ends clearly. There's no real explanation, no real closure. Just distance. And questions that stay in your mind longer than they should. So I want to ask you something. Which one of these signs felt the most familiar to you? Was it you? Or someone you're still trying to understand? Tell me in the comments. I read more than you think. And if this video made something click for you, save it. Because later, when things start making more sense, you might want to come back to this. And before you go, there are 2 other videos on the channel right now. One about the signs who pretend they don't care, and another about the ones who get attached but hide it. And honestly, this video is what happens after those. So if you want to understand the full picture, watch those next. I'll be here again tomorrow with something else you probably didn't know you needed to hear. So, stay close. See you in the next one.